I'm Lena Hart, 38, standing beneath my parents' pergola at a family-hosted launch party for my sister's fashion brand. Champagne pours like praise. Then my father taps his glass, smiles wide, and announces $1 million gift for Camila's company. He turns to me and says, "If only my eldest had made us proud." The garden goes silent. But in that silence, my grandmother rises slow, steady, and rewrites the night. What she revealed exposed a truth they spent years hiding. And it gave me back something they tried to take my voice. Before I tell you how it unraveled, let me know where you're watching from and hit like while I gather the strength to share what happened after the toast, after the lie, and after I stopped standing in the shadows. The glass of Sauvignon Blanc in my hand had gone warm, the condensation long since dried up. I stood near the back hedge, half-shaded by a sycamore, pretending to enjoy the breeze while my heels slowly sank into the lawn. The barbecue was in full swing, thick plumes of smoke rising from the grill where my father manned the tongs like a general in battle. Country music hummed from the Bluetooth speaker balanced on the patio rail, something from Miranda Lambert drifting over the chatter and laughter. I had arrived early. Too early, apparently, because by the time the rest of the guests showed up, I'd already walked the property twice, peeked in on my mother's hydrangeas, and made awkward small talk with a neighbor who still thought I lived in Boston. I didn't live in Boston. I hadn't for years. But it was easier to let them believe I did than to explain what I actually did now. I sipped the lukewarm wine and watched as my mother Sandra floated through the gathering in her embroidered blue kaftan, all smiles and cheek kisses. She was in her element, orchestrating everything from behind the scenes with practiced grace. Nothing escaped her except maybe me. Camila stepped out just then, making an entrance like always. She wore a flowing white maxi dress, off-shoulder, cinched at the waist with a braided gold belt that probably cost more than my entire closet. Her hair was done in those effortless waves influencers always seem to manage, and her nails gleamed with fresh polish. Conversation dipped for just a second as people turned. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did and just pretended not to. She walked straight to the patio where a circle of people made room for her like Moses parting the Red Sea. I tried not to stare. Camila had always been good at this. At being the center. At charming strangers and folding compliments into conversation like sweetener in iced tea. I used to think she didn't notice the attention. But I knew better now. Aunt Rosemary made her way over, clutching a paper plate piled with ribs and coleslaw. Her voice, as always, carried. "So Lena, your art program's still going? That charity thing?" I managed to smile. "It's not charity. It's community-based. We partner with the local library and a couple schools now. We just opened a second location in Waukegan." "That's sweet," she said, clearly uninterested. "You always did love doodling." I nodded and took another sip, letting the wine mask the bitter taste rising in my throat. I had learned over time not to expect validation here. Just survival. Polite deflection. Strategic silence. Across the yard, Camila laughed loud and bright at something my dad had said. He beamed at her, his tongs now idle in one hand. She'd always had his smile. I got his chin. And none of his praise. I checked my watch. 2 more hours, maybe 3 if dessert took long. Then I could drive home and exhale. A younger cousin ran past me with a water gun, shrieking. His little sister followed, her sun hat flapping with each step. I envied their freedom, that innocence that hadn't yet calcified into resentment or self-censorship. Behind me, someone was talking about real estate. Camila again. She was sharing her plans for a second home in Sedona. Something about red rocks and yoga retreats. People nodded along, asking for links to her Pinterest board. I stepped away before anyone could ask me what I'd been up to. Before, I had to explain that running an underfunded community arts collective meant 12-hour days, grant writing marathons, and more ramen than wine. I made my way to the side gate, slipped around to the front yard where fewer people mingled. The hydrangeas were wilting in the heat. I crouched and picked off a browned petal. It crumbled in my fingers. "You all right?" The voice startled me. I looked up and found David, my old high school friend, holding 2 beers. I shrugged. "Just needed some air." He offered me one. I took it, grateful to swap out the lukewarm wine for something cold and straightforward. Camila looks Happy, I said, trying to make my voice neutral. David nodded. She always did know how to own a room. We stood in silence a moment. The kind of silence that had once been easy between us back when we used to sit on his porch roof and talk about what we'd do once we left this town. Funny how things circle back. Or don't. You ever think about leaving again? He asked. All the time, I said. But my name's on a lease now. And 1,000 ceramic planters. And a dozen kids waiting on Tuesday's sculpture class. He smiled at that. You're doing something good, Lena. I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed, but because I wasn't sure it mattered here. Not in this backyard, not in this family. A burst of applause came from the patio. Camila was standing on a chair now toasting something. Probably herself. I drank the beer slowly, letting the cold sting remind me I was still present. Still standing. Still here. Even if no one quite saw me. Not really. Not yet. When I was 8, Camila got a pink canopy bed with lace curtains and a dresser shaped like a dollhouse. I got a plain wooden desk and a plastic lamp shaped like a paintbrush. It wasn't cruel, it was just how things were. Camila was delicate. I was practical. Camila wore dresses that needed ironing. I wore jeans with crayon marks on the back pocket. She took ballet. I got sent to soccer even though I hated the noise. My dad, Mark, wasn't mean, just absent in a very present way. His briefcases were always polished, his cologne sharp, his schedule booked. When he spoke, it was with bullet points, not paragraphs. He didn't yell, he didn't have to. One glance over his glasses and I'd feel like I'd misstepped without even knowing how. He admired discipline. Camila memorized her multiplication tables early, so he clapped. I painted a mural on my bedroom wall, and he asked how long it would take to repaint it when I got bored. Mom, on the other hand, tried to mold me. Not aggressively, just in a steady chipping way like water against stone. She signed me up for junior Toastmasters even though I had stage fright. She picked out turtlenecks for picture day. She once told me gently that messy hair makes people think messy thoughts. I learned to smile in a way that didn't show too much of who I was. Camila's wild curls were called personality. Mine were unruly. There was only one person who didn't seem to want to fix me. My grandmother, Joanna Hale, was a retired librarian who smelled like lavender and always had ink stains on her fingers. She lived in a little house 3 blocks away and kept her tea in mismatched tins. She talked to me like I had thoughts worth hearing. Sometimes she'd pick me up from school in her faded green Subaru, a sketch pad already waiting in the backseat. We'd drive to the lake, sit on the hood and draw ducks or clouds or nothing at all. She never told me I was too quiet. She just waited until I spoke. One afternoon, I was sitting cross-legged on her porch coloring in a tree with a dull green pencil when she sat beside me and asked what I loved most about drawing. I said I like how nobody interrupts me there. She didn't correct me, just nodded like she understood completely. I remember 6th grade vividly. That was the year I won first place in the statewide art competition. The ceremony was in a library downtown, and they framed my piece of a girl underwater, bubbles rising past her cheeks. My teacher said it showed emotional maturity. I wore a blazer that didn't quite fit and held my certificate with both hands like it might float away. That same week, Camila was named head cheerleader. Her name got printed in the school newsletter. At dinner, the conversation never left the gymnasium. My certificate sat on the sideboard behind the casserole dish, forgotten. Mom said something like cheerleading builds confidence, which Lena could use more of. Dad added, maybe next year she can enter something more practical like a science fair. I remember the way my grandmother's fork paused in midair. She didn't speak up, she just met my eyes for a second like she was passing a note in silence. I never forgot that look. Years later, when I got into an arts high school across town, my parents said the commute would be a waste. Camila stayed local and got a car. I took the bus and learned how to sketch people without them noticing. I drew my seatmates, my teachers, the janitor with the kind eyes who always nodded at me. I filled notebooks with lives nobody noticed. Maybe because I knew how it felt. Camila dated the quarterback. She went to prom in a white sequin dress and cried when she chipped her acrylics. I worked part-time at a bookstore and saved every dollar for art supplies. At night, I sketched until my fingers hurt. My teachers called it promise. My parents called it a phase. But Grandma Joanna never once said maybe. She framed every one of my drawings, even the smudged ones. She came to every exhibit even when they were in basements with bad lighting and lukewarm punch. Once after a college portfolio review, I broke down in her kitchen, convinced I wasn't good enough. She handed me a napkin and said softly, "The world doesn't need more noise, Lena. It needs more truth. And you draw it like breathing." Sometimes I wonder if she knew even then how temporary her voice would be in my life. After she passed, everything tilted just a little more toward Camila. My parents handled the will quietly. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know how her house got sold or why her favorite sketchbooks ended up in boxes in our attic instead of mine. I should have spoken. I didn't. Maybe I was still that kid with the paint on her elbows, waiting for someone to notice without having to raise her hand. Back at the barbecue, I watched Camila twirl by the grill laughing with her champagne flute, and I felt that same old tug in my chest. Like I was breathing air no one else needed. Like I existed in the blank space between family photos. My childhood wasn't awful, it was just edited. Cropped carefully. Framed around someone else's smile. A gust of wind blew smoke toward me thick with mesquite and charcoal. I blinked against it, eyes stinging, and took a sip from my glass. It had gone warm, but I didn't care. I told myself I was only staying another hour. Long enough to say goodbye. Long enough to prove, even if only to myself, that I could stand in that space and not disappear. That I didn't need applause, just air. Just enough room to remember who I used to be before I was edited out. They served deviled eggs and cucumber sandwiches on doilies so thin they tore the second you picked one up. I kept my fingers busy breaking the crusts off one triangle after another while conversations swirled around me. Someone from the church choir asked about my job, and I gave the same polite answer I always did. Marketing. Yes, still in Chicago. No, not married. Their smile twitched. I slipped away before anyone could introduce me to the new associate pastor. Outside, the late afternoon had turned dusky pink. The breeze had cooled and the edges of my sleeves fluttered like they were reminding me to move. I walked down the sloped gravel path behind the fellowship hall past the weeping birch trees I used to sketch when I was 12. I hadn't brought a coat, so I crossed my arms and hugged my elbows more out of reflex than cold. At the edge of the lot stood my rental car, parked between a pickup with a faded marine bumper sticker and someone's grandmother's dusty Subaru. I opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and just sat. The engine stayed off. My hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. My reflection stared back at me in the windshield. Same face. New eyes. The truth is, I never wanted to major in communications. Not for a second. I was 17 when I got my acceptance letter to the Westbridge School of Art in Seattle. I remember running into the kitchen, barefoot, envelope flapping like a flag in my hand. My mother didn't even turn from the sink. She just asked if I'd finally made a smart choice. I hadn't. Not by her definition. She'd already mailed my application to Northwestern by then. She had filled in half the paperwork before I'd even seen it. Her handwriting always looked more official than mine anyway. She said art was a hobby, not a future. That no daughter of hers was going to starve in a studio painting sunflowers no one would buy. So I went to Northwestern. I studied public relations and branding and the psychology of color, not the kind that stains your fingers but the kind that sells products. I smiled through focus groups. I took notes on brand recall and slogan resonance. I even got good at it. My first job out of college was at a boutique agency in downtown Chicago. Glass walls. Eames chairs. Cold brew on tap. My creative director once said I had a sharp eye and an intuitive pulse. Within 2 years, I was pitching to national clients. I could package anything. A razor. A mattress. A cereal that tasted like cardboard but promised to save marriages. I almost became creative director myself after one particularly slick campaign for a beverage company. Then came the toothpaste ad. It was a glossy commercial. A little girl brushing her teeth while her mom watched proudly in the mirror. Bright kitchen, morning sun. Subtle rainbow lens flare. Harmless on the surface. But I had seen the original, an obscure ad from a small non-profit in Sweden. Nearly frame for frame the same. Our version just had better lighting and a catchier jingle. When I brought it up to my manager, she smiled and said, "Welcome to advertising." So I quit. No drama, no public tantrum. Just a resignation email sent from my phone while sitting on the train home. I didn't even wait for a reply. That was the fall I started Art Bloom. I rented out a dusty garage from a retired mechanic named Russ. Every Tuesday, I dragged bins of watercolor paper and donated paint across the cracked concrete floor. The kids came after school, half from the shelter down the block, some from families barely hanging on. I didn't care if they were good. I only cared if they felt seen. We didn't color inside the lines. We didn't even use lines. We talked about how blue could feel like falling asleep and how orange reminded one boy of his grandmother's robe. They drew dragons, invented planets, painted their dreams. I had never felt more useful. One day, my mom visited the garage unannounced. She stood in the doorway while we were rinsing brushes in mason jars. The kids were laughing. One girl had a smear of magenta across her cheek. My mom didn't step inside. She just looked around and said, "So this is what you gave everything up for?" I smiled. She didn't. She called it a phase, an empty ideal. She said I was wasting my degree, my years, my potential. That maybe if I'd stayed at that agency, I'd be somebody worth listening to by now. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because she wouldn't have heard it. And now here I was. Back in town. Sitting in a car that wasn't mine. Watching the sun set over a town that had never really seen me. A place where people still thought I left because I got bored, not because I couldn't breathe in the version of life they handed me. A rectangle. That's what it always felt like. Like they were trying to fold me into a shape I didn't fit. College. Career. Marriage. A house with a red door and a husband who coached Little League. But I was never meant for rectangles. I was spirals and shadows and odd angles. I was paint under my fingernails and sketchbooks full of strange dreams. And even if no one back here understood that I did, I turned the key in the ignition and rolled the windows down. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as I backed out slow and steady. I didn't know exactly where I was going. But for the first time since arriving, I didn't feel like I was running, just remembering. The call came just after 7 on a Friday morning when the sky still wore its pale winter blue and I was trying to coax the heat into my studio with an old space heater. The nurse on the line said it plainly like it was any other detail in her shift: "Your grandmother had a stroke. She's stable but nonverbal. You should come." The paintbrush slipped from my hand and left a diagonal streak of burnt sienna across the floor. The drive to the rehab center in Bellevue felt longer than it should have. I kept hearing the nurse's voice in my head, the practiced calm of someone used to emergencies. When I arrived, they had already settled Joanna into a corner room on the 3rd floor, the one with the window facing a maple tree just beginning to bud. Her eyes flicked toward me when I walked in, and even though half her face drooped slightly, she managed a look I could only describe as determined. She was still there. Still fighting. No one else came. Not Mom, not Dad. Not even a courtesy text. I stayed. I rearranged my freelance schedule, canceled the children's art sessions, and set up a folding table in Joanna's room with my sketch pad and pencils. The nurses joked that I might as well be on staff. I didn't care. Feeding her soup with a plastic spoon, learning the exact tilt of her head that meant pain versus discomfort, reading to her from the newspaper in my slowest voice. I did it because it felt like breathing. Like I owed her this oxygen. One night, maybe 10 days in, I found a small envelope tucked inside one of her knitting baskets. It was pale green, folded twice, addressed to me in her shaky script. I almost didn't open it. Something about the intimacy of her handwriting felt sacred, like interrupting a prayer. But I did. Inside it read, "One day you'll understand, sometimes silence is the sharpest answer." No signature. Just that. I read it 3 times before tucking it into the back pocket of my journal. She didn't speak for the rest of her stay, not with words. But her eyes said more than most people ever do. They said thank you. They said don't explain yourself to people who have already decided not to listen. They said I see you even when the rest of them pretend not to. After Joanna was discharged, I moved my studio closer to her townhouse in Renton. It was a dusty little space behind an old florist shop with creaky floors and a cracked window, but it worked. She would come by twice a week sometimes just to sit in the warm afternoon light and watch the way the children mixed colors without rules. Sometimes she would bring her knitting. Sometimes she would fall asleep in the armchair by the door, the soft rise and fall of her breath matching the rhythm of paintbrushes on canvas. In her presence, I never had to prove I was doing something worthwhile. I never had to explain why I chose art over a corner office, why I stayed single, why I didn't own a condo or post curated brunches online. She simply existed next to me, quietly validating every choice by showing up listening without needing to understand. That spring my paintings changed. I didn't notice it at first, but the colors grew deeper, the shapes more layered. I started sketching scenes from memory instead of reference photos. A jar of her strawberry jam on a checkered tablecloth, her hands holding yarn, her garden shears resting on a stack of seed packets. They weren't remarkable objects, but through my brush they became sacred. One afternoon while she dozed in the armchair, I sat across from her with a half-finished canvas in front of me. I was trying to capture the way sunlight caught the silver in her hair. My brush hovered unsure. She stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open, then looked at the painting and gave the smallest nod. Approval. It was the last time she visited the studio. A few weeks later, she called to say she was feeling tired and would skip that week's visit, then the next, then the week after. She never said the words, but I think we both knew she was winding down. Letting go softly. When she passed, it was in her sleep in the bed beneath the quilt she had sewn the year I was born. I didn't cry right away. I just sat in the quiet of her room, staring at the small framed photo of the two of us from when I was 9, both of us covered in flour from a baking mishap, laughing. Her townhouse felt impossibly still without her. I helped with the sorting of her things, though no one asked me to. Mom busied herself with practicalities. Dad retreated behind spreadsheets and deadlines. I lingered in Joanna's closet in the laundry room that still smelled faintly of lavender, and the pantry lined with preserves she'd never get to open. In the drawer beside her bed I found another letter. Not addressed. Just left there folded once, no envelope. I knew the paper, knew the pen she used. The note was short. You already understand more than you think. Keep painting. That was all. Back at my studio, I cleared a space by the window and placed the letter in a small frame. The chair she loved still sat there, empty but not vacant. I left it as it was. It didn't feel like a monument, more like a promise. Some days I still think I hear her hum as I work. I let it happen. Let the silence stretch between brushstrokes like punctuation. Like prayer. The grill sizzled louder as more steaks hit the grate, sending smoke curling into the air like a second canopy above the backyard. Somewhere near the patio, someone had started a playlist of summery pop songs, the kind that always sounded faintly nostalgic even if you'd never heard them before. Kids ran barefoot across the lawn. A couple of college friends clinked beer bottles. The world buzzed with life, with celebration, with the kind of ease I hadn't felt in years. I stood under the cedar pergola, clutching a glass of lemonade I hadn't taken a sip of. My hand had started to ache from how tightly I gripped it. Camila laughed from somewhere behind the rose trellis, her voice floating over like confetti. She stepped into view moments later, radiant in a flowing white jumpsuit that caught the golden hour light just right. Her curls bounced as she waved to everyone. The crowd instinctively shifted to face her. Mom appeared beside her, a delicate flute of champagne in hand. Dad followed, microphone in one hand, and a wide smile stretched across his face. Everyone quieted, instinctively recognizing the rhythm of an announcement. Thank you all for being here this evening. Dad began, his voice confident, full. We're incredibly proud to share a little something we've been keeping under wraps. Our Camila has been working tirelessly behind the scenes on something very special. Mom placed a hand on Camila's shoulder, her eyes misting over slightly as she smiled toward the crowd. This fall she'll be launching her very own fashion line. A bold modern collection that blends sustainable design with the heart of downtown San Francisco. There were cheers. I didn't clap, I couldn't. My hands felt numb. And Dad continued turning to face more of the guests to support this incredible next chapter. Joanna and I are investing $1 million into her company. Consider it seed money from proud parents. Applause erupted like a firework. Some people whistled. Others clapped with both hands over their heads. Camila feigned modesty, putting her hand to her heart and mouthing, "Oh my God." She looked like she belonged there. Like that space had always waited for her to fill it. I took a step back into the shadow of the pergola, my back pressing against one of the wooden beams. I felt small. Smaller than I had in years. Smaller than when I left home at 22 with my backpack and $76 in a chipped wallet. Smaller than when I sat beside Grandma Joanna's hospital bed at 2 in the morning humming her lullabies back to her. Smaller than when I watched Camila graduate in a dress I had stitched for her uncredited unmentioned. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the business. It was the ease with which they gave it. The ease with which they claimed her. Promoted her, celebrated her. I felt like I was watching a different family. Or maybe I was just the static in the background of their highlight reel. Dad raised his glass, to Camila, the daughter who never stopped surprising us. And then it happened. He turned. Not toward Mom. Not toward Camila. Toward me. He said it lightly, like it was funny, like it would land like a joke that made everyone smile. "I just wish our eldest had made us this proud once upon a time." There was a pause. Not the good kind. The kind where air becomes thick. Where laughter dies in people's throats. Where people pretend they didn't hear what they just heard. Camila's smile faltered. She looked toward me, lips parted unsure. My ears rang. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I stood there with that untouched lemonade and let the words settle. Let them hang in the air like smoke from a kitchen fire. Unseen at first, then choking. I could feel people watching me. Guests I hadn't spoken to in years. Colleagues of my father's. Neighbors from the old block. Friends of Camila's who only knew me as the older sister who painted weird murals and skipped Christmas last year. I swallowed. Don't cry, don't defend. Don't give them the dignity of a scene. A woman I vaguely remembered from church reached for a new skewer of grilled shrimp and muttered something under her breath. Another man shifted uncomfortably and coughed. Camila stepped forward, placing a hand on Dad's arm, her voice soft but audible. "Dad. Maybe." But he waved her off with a chuckle. "I'm just teasing. Come on, it's a celebration." No one laughed. I turned and walked toward the side yard. The gravel crunched under my shoes louder than it should have. I passed the citronella candles, the punch bowl, the gift table. I kept my face neutral, my posture steady, my pace even. I didn't rush. Didn't give them that either. Behind me the music resumed. Someone adjusted the volume slightly. I heard Camila laughing again, a little too loud, a little too bright, like someone trying to overwrite a bad line with a better one. I reached the side gate, slid it open slowly, and stepped outside. The cool air met my cheeks like a slap and a balm all at once. I stood there on the sidewalk under the glow of the string lights that spilled just beyond the fence. $1 million. For her dream. A joke for mine. That was the trade-off. I looked up. The sky had started to turn violet at the edges, the last of the light melting behind the neighbor's roof. My phone buzzed. A text from Theo. Just 3 words. "You okay?" I stared at it, blinking back something hot and sharp. Then I typed back. Just needed air. And I did. But what I needed more than air was space. Not the kind they gave me. The kind I would carve for myself. Even if it meant starting with nothing. Again. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding my breath until the bathroom door clicked shut behind me. The quiet was a relief, almost sacred, even as my reflection stared back with reddened eyes and trembling lips. The light above the mirror buzzed faintly, casting everything in an unforgiving hue. I pressed my palms into the cool marble sink, grounding myself the way I used to when I was younger, after the shouting matches or the silent treatments or the long family dinners where I felt more like a ghost than a daughter. $1 million. He said it like he was offering her lunch. The applause hadn't stopped ringing in my ears. Not the sound of celebration, but the sharp contrast it made to the stillness inside me. I wasn't jealous of the money. It wasn't even the brand launch or the champagne toasts. It was the certainty. The ease with which they handed her the world. I could have been proud of her. I wanted to be. But the weight of my father's words, the way he turned the knife with a smile and a microphone, made that impossible. I leaned over and splashed cold water on my face, watching it drip from my chin like something I could wash away. But I couldn't rinse off humiliation. I couldn't cleanse myself of being made the punchline in my own home. Not when his voice echoed in my head so clearly I thought he might have followed me in. You never made us proud. I bit the inside of my cheek hard until I tasted metal. The door was locked. The party was still happening. I didn't have to go back. I could sneak out the side door, vanish the way they'd always half expected me to. I could leave them in their perfect storybook scene and become a name they only whispered when talking about regret. But I didn't move. I stood there in that tight little bathroom, watching myself slowly fall apart in the mirror. Outside the frosted window, I caught flashes of movement. Laughter. Glasses clinking. Camila's voice rising above the rest, smooth and polished like a ribbon in a department store window. My mother brushing her hair back, the gesture so familiar it hurt. The way her hand lingered, proud and tender and completely foreign when it came to me. A knock startled me. I stepped back quickly, wiping at my cheeks as if that would erase the redness or the puffiness or the years. Lena, it's me. Grandma. Her voice was soft. Softer than I'd ever heard it. I hesitated, heart thudding, then turned the lock and opened the door. She stood there in her loose navy cardigan, her silver hair pinned back in the same careful style she always wore. Her eyes, though, looked different. Not sharp, not stern. Just tired. I need you to help me get to the yard, she said, holding out her hand. I blinked, unsure for a second whether she was asking or offering something else entirely. But I took her hand. It was smaller than I remembered. Fragile. Her fingers curled into mine like muscle memory. She leaned on me as we made our way down the hallway, past the framed photos of Camila's graduation and the family vacations I was cropped out of. I didn't ask her why she wanted to go out there now, not when the whole crowd was still basking in Camila's golden hour. I just followed her pace, steady and slow. You okay? I asked gently. No, she said. But I will be. We reached the back patio and the noise swelled again like a wave crashing over us. I almost turned back, but Grandma's grip tightened just slightly. So I led her down the steps past the string lights and the group of guests now gathered around a cake with gold lettering. Mark spotted us. His smile didn't falter, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. The recognition. "Oh, you're still here." I stopped near the hedge, giving Grandma a bit of shade. She didn't sit, just stood beside me, watching everything unfold. Camila cut the cake. Guests clapped. My mother snapped photos. My father raised his glass for another toast. Family, he said loud and clear. The crowd quieted. I want to thank all of you for being here to celebrate our Camila. She has always had vision, grace, and determination. And now she's stepping into the world with a brand that reflects everything she's built. He paused dramatically. And to help her along, we've decided to invest $1 million in her future. Because we believe in her. Because she's earned it. The applause was thunderous. I looked away, my throat dry, my chest tight. Then he turned, smiling directly at me. I just wish our eldest had given us the same chance to be proud. The silence that followed was immediate and complete. Like someone had hit mute on the entire party. Every eye turned. Some glanced away quickly. Others lingered, curious, unsure whether this was part of the show or something else entirely. My stomach flipped. My palms burned. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Grandma did. She stepped forward just enough to draw attention and laid a hand on my arm. You don't need to answer that, she said, her voice firm. She was facing the crowd now, but she spoke only to me. Some people confuse money with meaning. But I see you, Lena. I always have. Then she turned to my father, her expression calm. Mark, maybe it's time we stop measuring pride in dollar signs. The silence held for another beat, then someone cleared their throat. Someone else murmured about needing more champagne. The moment passed, swept away in the clinking of glasses and the hum of polite distraction. But I stood straighter. Grandma stayed beside me, steady as ever. And for the first time all evening, I felt like I wasn't alone. The crunch of gravel beneath my sandals followed us as I slowly guided Grandma Joanna toward the center of the patio. The sky had shifted into that deep twilight blue where the string lights overhead seemed to shimmer just a little more brightly, as if they sensed what was coming. My fingers curled gently around her forearm, steadying her step by step. Around us, laughter swirled like smoke, light and careless, but it started to thin as people turned to watch. The music from the Bluetooth speaker faded out mid-verse. Maybe someone paused it, or maybe it just surrendered. Either way, silence wrapped around us as Grandma let go of my hand and placed both palms on the back of a wrought iron chair. Her fingers pressed into the metal like she was grounding herself. I could hear someone set their wineglass down a little too hard. The clink echoed. Grandma straightened slowly, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. She didn't speak right away. Just stood there letting the quiet stretch until even the cicadas in the trees seemed to hush. Then she said it. I have sat in this yard for over 30 years, and I've seen who gets to speak, and who gets ignored. A ripple went through the garden. The kind that doesn't come from wind. The kind that moves from person to person like a secret being passed without words. She looked straight ahead, not at anyone in particular, but her voice cut clean through the humid Georgia air. Some of you have only known this place when it was dressed up with lights and cocktails and made to look like a magazine spread. But I remember when Lena was 5, running barefoot through those flower beds carrying a plastic crown she made out of tinfoil and string. No one had to tell her she was special. She just knew. My breath caught. I hadn't thought about that crown in decades. But then, little by little, she learned to stay quiet, because every time she spoke, someone laughed. Or corrected her. Or told her she was too much, too dramatic, too sensitive. The crowd shifted. Some guests glanced at each other. A few looked down at their shoes, and lately you all seem to have decided she failed. That's the word floating around this week, isn't it? Failed. Her voice was softer now, but it didn't lose strength. It reminded me of slow rivers that look calm on the surface but could pull you under in an instant. I wonder, is failing when you lose a job? Or is it failing when you raise a child to believe their worth depends on your mood? Camila sat frozen beside our mother. I could see her jaw set, a muscle twitching. Mom's face was unreadable, a polite smile frozen in place like it had been painted on hours ago. And is success really just about who shows up in pearls and polished shoes with a fancy business card and the right kind of husband? Grandma's eyes finally landed on me. My heart thudded in my chest so hard I was afraid people could hear it. Because if that's all it is, then yes, maybe Lena failed. She paused. But if survival counts for something, if getting back up after people have knocked you down again and again matters, if learning to hold your own pain and still offer kindness to others means anything, then maybe you need to rethink your definition. The air was still, nobody moved. Not even the kids who had been running around minutes earlier. It was as if the whole garden was holding its breath. When I was her age, Grandma continued, I had already buried 2 children. And no one called me a failure. They called me strong. A soft murmur rose from the back. Someone cleared their throat. I noticed Mr. Lawton from down the street remove his sunglasses and tuck them into his shirt pocket. He'd always looked at me like I was the neighbor kid who never quite got it together. But now his expression had changed. Softer. Curious. I'm not saying Lena is perfect. Lord knows none of us are. But I won't sit here in my own backyard and let her be talked about like she's invisible. Or broken. Grandma stepped back from the chair. For a second, I thought she might fall, but I caught her elbow. She gave it a light pat. That's all she said, simply. Let's eat before the casserole dries out. Laughter bubbled up. Tentative at first, then warm. Real. Some of the tension melted with it like frost under morning sun. As I led her back toward her seat, people parted without being asked. A few nodded at me. A couple smiled. Not the kind of smile that said, "Oh, poor thing," but something closer to acknowledgement. Respect. Camila didn't look at me. Mom busied herself with the wine bottle. When Grandma sat down, she reached for my hand under the table and gave it a small squeeze. I didn't speak. I couldn't have even if I'd tried. Because something had shifted, not just in the garden, but inside me. And when I looked up, I saw something else I didn't expect. Dad standing quietly on the back porch, arms crossed, watching everything. His face unreadable. And suddenly I knew the night wasn't over. Something about the way she said my name made the entire space feel smaller, more intimate, like she'd just pulled a thread no one else dared touch. "Lena," she said again, this time more clearly. Then she took a breath and looked directly at me. I didn't move. My knees were locked. I could feel the sting of everyone's attention circling back around to me. "I have something to give you," Joanna said. Not as a surprise, and certainly not as a favor, but as a long overdue acknowledgement. The murmuring died down again, replaced by a quiet tension. She reached slowly into the side pocket of her blazer and pulled out a folded stack of papers. Legal-sized, held together by a black binder clip. "This," she said, lifting the pages, "is the formal charter of a nonprofit arts foundation. It's been fully filed with all the proper certifications and has had a legal team overseeing it for over 3 years. Its name is the Edith Foundation for Independent Voices." The air felt suddenly heavier. She looked at me again. "And you, Lena, are its first executive director." I blinked. The words didn't register at first. My thoughts jammed together like a traffic pileup. She went on. "It starts with a seed grant of $1.5 million. All of it already transferred. All of it earmarked for community arts projects, especially those run by women, immigrants, and people who've been historically excluded from gallery spaces." My breath caught in my chest. Joanna smiled faintly. "I wanted to do this 2 years ago, but the paperwork took longer than I expected. There's a board in place. Independent and not connected to me or the family trust. The financials are publicly available. Audited annually. It is legally incorporated under the federal tax-exempt status for charitable organizations." A small ripple passed through the crowd. The older man sitting next to my father leaned forward slightly, maybe recognizing the weight of what had just been said. $1.5 million wasn't pocket change. Not in this family, and definitely not in the world I came from. I looked at Joanna, trying to read if this was another test. Another public performance wrapped in a beautiful bow. But she seemed calm, grounded. "This is not a prize," she said, her voice firm but clear. "And it's not a gift. It's what should have been yours years ago, in support, in resources, in belief. This is my attempt to begin righting what was wrong." There were no applause, no polite clapping. Just stunned silence and the occasional shuffle of a foot on stone. From somewhere behind me, I heard someone whisper, "Did she just say foundation?" I took a step forward. My hands trembled slightly at my sides. I felt like the air might press me flat if I didn't keep moving. Joanna looked at me as if asking for permission to keep speaking. I nodded once. "I have spent years watching the women in this family hold their breath to keep the peace. I've watched silence masquerade as grace. That ends tonight. This is a beginning, Lena. Not an end. The work is yours now." She handed the folder to Lena, who stepped forward without hesitation. She didn't hesitate, I did. My fingers brushed the edge of the folder. It was heavier than I expected. Denser, maybe from the weight of everything it represented. Not just funds or titles, but recognition. I cleared my throat, not sure what to say. "Joanna," I began, then stopped. She tilted her head, waiting. "Thank you doesn't feel like the right word. Not because I'm not grateful, but because what you've done here feels corrective. Not kind." She smiled faintly. "Then we're on the same page." I looked down at the folder again. Inside, I could already picture pages of legal language, mission statements, maybe even my name typed neatly under a list of officers. "You did all this. For me, I did this because you deserved more than we gave you. You've always deserved more." I felt something shift in me. Not quite forgiveness, but space. From the far side of the garden, my mother sat still, her hands curled tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken. My father looked vaguely uncomfortable, staring at the flames in the centerpiece like they held the answers. The guests looked lost, like they didn't know whether to return to their wine glasses or remain in witness to something fragile. Lena Joanna said again, softer now. You are not invisible, not to me. Not anymore. I exhaled. Long, quiet. And for the first time I felt like I was standing in my own name. There were no cheers, no champagne toasts. But as I held the foundation documents in my hand, I felt the cool edge of something real. Not performance, not drama. Just presence. And it was enough to carry me through the next breath. And the next. The night wasn't over. But it no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to what came after. By the time I woke up the next morning, my phone was already humming. Messages, missed calls, mentions. The clip of my mother at the gala had gone viral. Someone had filmed her entire speech, zooming in just as she said, "It's not a reward, but an apology." The video had hit over 2 million views in 12 hours and was still climbing. People were tagging me in everything. Tweets, TikToks, comment, threads that read like redemption arcs. Some called her brave, some called her overdue, but most of all they were talking about me. Lena Riley. The daughter who was always in the background, now suddenly the center of something. I turned off the notifications. I needed coffee. And silence. And maybe a moment where I could sit with the fact that someone finally saw me and didn't flinch. The kettle hissed in the quiet apartment while I stared at my inbox. Among the PR requests and congratulations was one name that made my stomach drop. Tracy Morgan. Tracy and I had met in undergrad, both interns at the same local magazine. She went the journalism route. I went the nonprofit path. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since I missed her engagement party. But the email was simple. Lena, I need to speak with you. It's about Camila. It's important. She didn't write anything else. No smiley. No sign-off. Just her number. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then backed away. I grabbed my phone and called. She answered on the first ring. Lena, she said immediately, are you alone? I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yeah, I'm home. What's going on? I just got an anonymous tip, Tracy said, and you're not gonna like it. I sat down slowly. Okay, talk. She took a breath. Do you remember Camila's startup, the one she opened in Palo Alto back in 2020? I felt my shoulders tense. Barely. It folded in like a year. That's because it wasn't just poor timing, Tracy said. According to this email, there was an internal investigation for financial misconduct. Someone had flagged inconsistent expenditures. Personal travel disguised as business, inflated invoices, money funneled into ghost contractors. I closed my eyes. And the board was about to go public. But her parents stepped in. They used leverage with a venture partner to absorb the company quietly and bury the records. Camila was never formally charged. The whistleblower got a severance and an NDA. My mouth felt dry. Are you sure this isn't a smear? That's why I'm calling, she said. I checked the metadata. The documents attached internal memos, dated financial reports, even a scanned HR letter marked confidential. They look real. I'm verifying with a source now. But Lena, what you need to be ready. If this breaks publicly, it's not just about Camila, it's about how your family operates. I exhaled through my teeth. I need to think. I didn't hang up right away. Tracy waited. But I said nothing more. When the line finally went dead, I sat at my kitchen table with my hands clasped tightly together like a prayer I wasn't sure I believed in. My family had always drawn lines between public and private. Keep the shine, hide the mess. Camila had always danced between the two worlds like it was natural. Maybe that's why she looked so flawless in every magazine feature. Maybe that's why I never trusted mirrors. I thought of the foundation. The trust, the funding, the paperwork. All mine now, at least on record. But if this story exploded, would it pull me in too? I opened my laptop. Searched. Dug deeper. The company Tracy mentioned had barely any presence online. No LinkedIn history for Camila between 2020 and 2021. Just a vague blip on an archived funding tracker, seed closed, acquirer undisclosed. Buried. But not erased. The next morning, Tracy published the article. Headline: Hidden Scandals in Silicon Sisters Camila Riley's Startup Secrets. It wasn't accusatory, not directly, it posed questions. Cited unnamed sources. Included redacted documents that looked just incriminating enough to start a storm but not end it. The fallout was immediate. Comments flooded in. People reposted the video from the gala with captions like "Did she know?" and "Turns out apologies come with interest." Camila didn't respond. Neither did my parents, but their silence was louder than any press release. By midday, an op-ed followed. Then a podcast breakdown. Then a LinkedIn essay titled "The Cost of Pretty Narratives." And suddenly, I wasn't the only Riley sister people wanted to hear from. That evening, my phone rang again. This time, it was Camila. Her voice was tight-clipped. "Did you know I didn't pretend to misunderstand? About the startup, you could have warned me," she said. "You let me walk into that room while the internet was sharpening its knives." I let out a bitter laugh. "Camila, I found out yesterday." From Tracy. Her breath caught. "So you didn't leak it?" I could barely form the words. "You really think I'd risk my own name to get back at you?" There was a long pause. "I don't know what you'd do anymore." "Then maybe you never did." She didn't reply. I waited. Then said softly, "Camila, you built a life on glass and mirrors. If it's shattering, maybe don't blame the light." She hung up. That night I sat alone in my living room, the television muted, the world buzzing outside my window. I didn't ask for this spotlight. I didn't stage any revenge. But maybe, just maybe, the truth has a way of showing up when it's tired of being buried. And if this was only the beginning, I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was watching. Carefully, quietly, steady as a fuse, waiting to see what caught fire next. The calls started just after 7 a.m. First, it was my mother, then my father. Then both of them together from the landline, which they only used when the situation was serious enough to warrant a united front. I didn't answer any of them. They left 3 voicemails between them, all variations of the same plea. Don't talk to the press. Don't confirm anything. Don't embarrass the family. Let things settle down. I stood in the kitchen of my apartment in Astoria, staring at my phone on the counter as it buzzed again and again. I didn't touch it. I made coffee instead, slow and deliberate, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot as if the rhythm of it could steady my thoughts. By the time I sat at the table with my mug, the messages had stopped. In their place came a single text from my mother. "Please, Lena, for the family's sake. For Camila." There was a time when that might have worked on me. When I still believed keeping quiet was a kind of protection. That silence was loyalty. That being the older sister meant absorbing the damage to shield the others. But that time had passed. I pressed the side button and shut my phone off completely. That afternoon, Joanna came over. She brought her briefcase and her resolve. She sat across from me on the couch, her expression unreadable as she opened the leather folder and slid a crisp paper across the coffee table toward me. It was a formal letter, typed, signed, and dated. It announced that all public and legal communications regarding the Elysian Women's Fund would now be handled by Caleb Reyes, a senior partner at Reyes and Montgomery Law in Manhattan. Joanna folded her hands. "This is to make sure you're protected. The fund is operating under full legal compliance. Caleb will handle any inquiries going forward." I looked at the letter, then back at her. "And Camila?" Joanna hesitated, then said, "She's navigating this in her own way." I nodded slowly. "Right. Of course she is." Joanna stood, adjusted her blazer, and said, "You did what you had to do. I respect that." But she didn't sound like she meant it. She sounded like someone putting out a fire before it spread further into her domain. The next knock came just after sunset. It was Camila. She looked nothing like the woman who'd posed with champagne flutes and choreographed speeches. Her hair was pulled back messily and she wore a loose hoodie and leggings, no makeup. Her eyes were puffy like she hadn't slept. I didn't invite her in. I just stepped aside and let her walk into the apartment she hadn't set foot in for nearly 2 years. She didn't sit. She paced, arms crossed tightly over her chest. I didn't know Tracy would actually publish it. I didn't think it'd explode like this. I leaned against the counter. You didn't think I would say anything. That's what you mean. Camila stopped pacing and looked at me. You always let it go, Lena. You've always been the quiet one. The calm one. I didn't think you'd— Her voice trailed off, but I knew what she meant. I didn't think you'd change. That's the thing, Camila, I said. I haven't changed. I just stopped pretending silence was the same as peace. She sat down, finally sinking into the armchair like the weight of everything had finally caught up with her. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to get caught, I said. Her face tightened. That's not fair. Isn't it? She was quiet then. Her shoulders curled inward. I thought if the fun succeeded, it would make everything worth it. That Mom and Dad would finally see me as something more than a mess. That maybe I could be someone you looked up to again. That last part stung more than I expected. You didn't have to lie to do that. I know. You didn't have to forge my name. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I waited. Eventually, she said, it was just the first grant. The biggest one. We needed a headliner donor to apply for the matching funding. After that, everything took off. I always meant to make it right. Always meant to. I repeated the words in my head and let them settle between us like dust. You made a choice, Camila. Not just one. 100 choices over years. Every time you used my name. Every time you let people believe it was your work. Every time you stood on a stage and thanked yourself for something that wasn't yours. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I'm sorry. I believe you, I said, but it doesn't fix it. She looked up. So, what happens now, I don't know. Will you tell them more? I already told the truth. Whatever happens after that isn't up to me. She stood then like something in her had broken just enough to force movement. I thought you'd always protect me. I did. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to cry, maybe just to ask for something I couldn't give anymore. But I walked to the door and opened it before she could say anything. She stood there for a moment. Then she walked out. I locked the door behind her and leaned against it. Not with anger, not with relief, but with a kind of finality I hadn't felt in years. We pulled the dust-covered tarp off the old warehouse door as the spring wind swept through Lincoln Park carrying the smell of damp wood and blooming dogwoods. The building creaked like it hadn't been touched in decades, but beneath the rust and decay I saw something I hadn't in a long time. Potential. Not for profit, not for glory. Just something that could belong to people like me. Like the girls I once mentored at the high school down on Sheffield. The ones who didn't think they belonged in galleries or theaters because no one had ever told them they could. Micah was beside me, clipboard in hand, calling out measurements. Danny, who had joined our team after working with a youth orchestra in Pilsen, recorded footage for our first grant proposal. Inside, the space looked like a forgotten relic from a world that had long since moved on. Concrete floors, shattered skylights, walls layered in graffiti and mildew. But we didn't flinch. We were used to starting from scratch. Caleb arrived mid-morning with coffee and an industrial contractor who had ties to the community. No one here wanted a high-rise. They wanted a place to gather, to create, to remember. I could see the excitement in their eyes when I showed them the sketches we had drafted: a black box theater, an open gallery space, a recording studio tucked behind reclaimed wood walls. It wouldn't be shiny, it wouldn't be polished, but it would be ours. Later that afternoon, as the sunlight filtered in through broken glass panes, I set up my laptop on a stack of paint cans and opened our first press interview request. A local reporter from WGLC had emailed to schedule a feature. I nearly deleted it out of habit. But then I remembered something Joanna once told me. If they're going to write about you anyway, make sure it's in your words. We arranged to meet outside the building a few days later. The sky was clear and the scent of fresh asphalt lingered from roadwork nearby. The reporter, a woman named Carmen with curly hair and scuffed Converse, asked the usual questions about our mission, our timeline, our budget. But then she leaned in and asked, "So, Lena, what does success look like to you?" I paused, brushing dust off my jeans. The wind tugged at my jacket. And for once the answer came easy. Success is when you no longer need permission to create something good. She smiled, nodded, and scribbled in her notebook. The story aired 2 nights later, right after the evening news. Joanna watched it on her tablet in California. She called me the next morning, her voice raspier than usual but steady. "I saw the piece. You were poised, clear, strong." I swallowed, unsure how to respond. There had been a time I would have waited for her approval, craved it like air. But now I just said thanks for watching. She asked to see the plans again. I sent her a revised blueprint, and she spent the next 30 minutes on Zoom giving notes, pointing out structural issues I hadn't caught. It felt strange, like we were collaborating. Like we had returned to something halfway familiar, except the ground rules had changed. This time I didn't shrink. By May, we had cleared the debris, patched the roof, and brought in the local art students to help paint murals along the west wall. They chose themes of origin and transformation. Some painted their families, others painted silence. One girl painted a burning chair. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. News of the project began to ripple beyond our zip code. A national education nonprofit reached out for a partnership. A city council member invited me to speak at an upcoming forum on community renewal. And a retired music producer from Atlanta emailed to donate vintage equipment for the recording room. People started calling the warehouse the Echo. A name chosen not by me but by a high school senior who said every city needed a place to hold the sounds people forgot. The name stuck. One afternoon after a site meeting, I walked down the alley behind the building and stopped to watch a group of kids rehearsing a spoken word piece near the loading dock. Their words cracked the air open like lightning. I leaned against the brick wall and let myself listen, really listen. It struck me then. All the years I had spent begging for a seat at tables I never built. All the ways I contorted myself to be palatable, to be digestible, to be what they could stomach. And here in a forgotten warehouse with no chairs, I had finally found something better. Not a seat, but ground to stand on. One night, Caleb and I sat on folding chairs in the unfinished gallery eating takeout from a taco truck parked down the street. He looked around and said, "It's happening, Lena. Whether they like it or not." I smiled at that. Not because it felt like a win, but because it didn't have to. It just felt right. We didn't build the Echo to be loud. We built it so that quiet voices had somewhere to go. Somewhere to be heard. And maybe for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what they'd say when they finally spoke. 3 months later, I was sitting on the edge of my childhood bed in Willow Creek, looking down at a folded piece of paper I couldn't bring myself to open. My mother had found it in Joanna's nightstand. It wasn't labeled, just my name on the front in her familiar cursive. I knew the letter wouldn't change anything, but still I waited. Joanna passed away in her sleep. Peacefully, the hospice nurse said, like someone who had finished her work. We held a small service in the garden behind her home. No fanfare. Just lilies, her favorite records playing on low, and a sky that stayed clear and blue as if it understood what was happening. I wore a simple black dress. No speeches, no eulogies. Just moments. People came and placed a stone or a flower by the base of the oak tree she had planted the year I moved in. Some hugged me. Some didn't say a word. It didn't matter. Joanna had already said everything that needed to be said, just not always out loud. After the service, I returned to the Echo. It felt heavier that day. The halls quieter. We'd placed her portrait in the main entrance just the week before. I had painted it from memory. She wasn't smiling, not exactly, but there was this calm on her face. The kind of stillness that only comes when someone has stopped pretending to be anything but exactly who they are. My mother arrived later than the others. She wore a dark gray coat and held her purse like it was armor. When she stepped into the lobby, she stopped right in front of the painting. She didn't ask who painted it, she knew. She stood there for a long while before saying anything. "She'll be proud of you," I didn't respond. I just took 2 steps back and let the sunlight fall across the canvas. It warmed the edges, the brush strokes, the colors I hadn't realized I'd chosen until they were dry. The golds, the rust, the deep purples, all of it layered over years I had spent trying to find a name for what she had been to me. Not a mother, not quite a mentor. Something in between. Something I didn't know how to define but had stopped needing to. My mother didn't stay long. She didn't ask to see the studio or the garden or the mural on the west wall that students had finished just last week. She touched my shoulder briefly, then left. I didn't walk her out. Later that afternoon, I sat in Joanna's old chair, the creaky one she always said she'd replace but never did. The letter was still folded on my lap. I opened it slowly, expecting something profound or poetic. But what I found was simpler than that. It said, "If you're reading this, it means I've stopped watching from the doorway, Lena. You were never meant to stay silent. You just needed someone to remind you that your voice mattered. I'm glad I could be that person. Now go be that person for someone else." I cried quietly, the kind of cry that doesn't shake your body, just empties you out. I sat there until the light changed and the room grew cooler, then walked back through the building alone. That night we held our first open mic event in the finished space. A soft launch. No big promotion. Just tea lights, folding chairs, and a handwritten sign that said, "The Echo is open." I stood near the back as a girl no older than 16 read a poem about her grandmother. Her voice cracked halfway through, but no one laughed. No one looked away. They waited. And when she finished, the applause was small, but it filled the room in a way no echo ever could. I thought of Joanna again. Her slippers. Her stubborn kindness. Her silence that always seemed full, never empty. I thought of the way she let me come to her on my own terms. The way she taught me that love doesn't always arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes it shows up with soup and clean socks and a space to paint. The portrait now hangs in the main lobby under a plaque that reads, "She listened." It wasn't about grand gestures. It never was. It was about showing up. About staying. About building something that would outlast the noise and give people a place to speak without shouting. I still have the coat she gave me. I don't wear it much anymore, but I keep it near the door. Just in case a winter wind blows through and I need to remember where I came from. As I walk through the Echo now, I see faces I don't know yet. Stories I haven't heard. But I recognize the weight they carry, and I know what it means to finally put it down. If someone ever stood up for you, fought for you even when you couldn't fight for yourself, I hope you'll remember them. And if one day you find yourself standing up not because it's easy but because it's right, I hope you'll tell that story too. Thank you for listening to mine.